Hello, everyone. Let's revise the research that was conducted by Holzel et al. This research was on mindfulness and brain scans. To begin with, let's discuss the psychology that is being investigated over here. There are two things that I'd ask you to keep in mind to be able to revise this. Number one, this research revolves around mindfulness. Number two, localization of functions. Now, what is mindfulness? Mindfulness is a technique that helps reduce stress and improve the well being by focusing on the present moment and fostering kindness and acceptance. Although psychologists are not sure how mindfulness based stress reduction works to enhance well being, brain imaging shows which part of the brain might be involved. Number two, localization of function. What is localization of function here? Localization of function is a concept that certain parts of the brain are linked to specific behaviors or the way we think. This particular study used MRI and VBM to see how MBSR training might change the structure of certain brain areas, such as the hippocampus and the insula. Moving on to the background of the research, people who meditate have been found out to have more gray matter in the hippocampus and insula. So people who meditate have more gray matter in the hippocampus and insula compared to those who do not meditate. For instance, studies using fMRI have shown that the hippocampus is active when a person is meditating. Remember, hippocampus is active when a person meditates. It is possible that the increase in gray matter concentration following mindfulness or meditation practice is connected to improvements in well being. Moving on towards the aims of this particular research. Number one, to study the changes in gray matter concentration after an 8-week MBSR program. MBSR over here stands for Mindfulness Based Stress Reduction Program. Number two, to find out the specific brain structures that undergo a change. The specific brain structures that undergo a change after completing the 8-week MBSR program. Moving on towards the research methods and design that were used over here. Number one, this was a longitudinal research, and there was a mixed experimental design that was used over here. Why is it that we're referring to it as a mixed design? Because we had the repeated measures design as well as the independent measures design used over here. For the repeated measures design, brain scans were done before and after the 8-week MBSR program. How is it that independent measures were used over here? Results from the MBSR group were compared with a group that did not do MBSR. So we're talking about two groups over here. The first group, we refer to this as the experimental group. The second group that did not go through the MBSR program, we refer to this as the control group. Moving on, there was also correlation. There were also correlations to be found that were looked in over here. Researchers looked at how the time participants spent practicing mindfulness was related to increase in the gray matter concentration. So researchers were trying to look at the time participants spent practicing MBSR and its relationship with to the increase in gray matter concentration. Moving on quickly to the data collection techniques over here. Number one, MRI. MRI scans were used. Scans were done 2 weeks before the MBSR session and at the end of the 8-week training. So we're talking about good 10 weeks over here, right? So 2 weeks before the MBSR, 2 weeks before the first MBR session, there were scans done. And the scans were done again after the 8-week training. One. Number two, a 3D digital brain model was made for each person as well. Number two, data was also collected through self-report measures. Number one, the 5 facet of mindfulness questionnaire, also referred to as the FFMQ, was used to measure 5 important aspects of mindfulness that are found to be positively correlated to well-being. The second thing that has to be kept in mind over here is participants, they rated 39 statements from 1 to 5, where 1 meant never or very rarely true, and 5 meant often or always true. So typically, we're talking about the first way through which data was being collected, and this was the second way through which this data was collected. Now, moving on, Let's speak about the independent variables here. Number one, the experimental group. Remember the group that went through the MBSR program. And number two, the control group that was put in a waiting list, or the group that at that particular time did not go through the MBSR program. However, after the research finished, they were given this opportunity to go through the MBSR program. So the experimental group comprised of 6 males, 10 females with an average age of 38 years. They went to 2.5-hour group MBSR meetings every week for 8 weeks, and they had one session of 6.5-hour training a day. These sessions they included three main elements. They were number one, yoga, number two, meditation, and number three, body scanning. Now, if we speak about the control group over here, the control group comprised of 11 males, 6 females with an average age of 39 years. They did not attend these MBSR meetings, but they were on a waiting list for future MBSR. MRI scans were taken before and after the first MBSR session and at the end of the 8-week study period. Taking this ahead, let's talk about dependent variables over here. VBM, also referred to as voxel-based morphometry, this was used to measure gray matter concentration, which we have been referring to earlier as GMC, throughout the brain, but specifically in the hippocampi and insula. Now, mindfulness was also measured using the FFMQ. FFMQ, if you remember, refers to the 5 facets of mindfulness questionnaire. Now, what were the co-variables that were measured over here? The time participants spent on mindfulness exercises between training sessions. They would use daily diaries to report this information themselves. Now, taking this ahead again, let's move on and discuss the sample size here. The sample comprised of 33 participants. In the experimental group, there were 6 males and 10 females. However, in the control group, there were 11 males and 6 females. Pause this here and learn it right away. Moving on towards the demographics of the sample. These participants, they were right-handed. They were healthy adults between the ages of 25 and 55 years. They were not taking any regular medication and had limited experience with meditation as well. Do not get confused between medication and meditation here. Moving on towards the sampling technique. Participants were recruited from 4 MBSR courses held at Mindfulness Center in New England, USA. All participants were referred or were self-referred for stress-related reasons. Taking this ahead, moving on towards the procedure, which we divide into 3 easy steps. Step number one, where participants had MRI scans and filled out the FFMQ 2 weeks before the first MBSR meeting. Step number two, the experimental group underwent 8 weeks of MBSR and were given a 45-minute audio recording of mindfulness exercises to practice at home. Step number three, participants had MRI scans and completed the FFMQ 2 weeks after the final MBSR meeting. Moving on towards the controls that were used over here, participant variables were controlled by number one, using a repeated measures design, which means testing the same people twice at the start and at the end of the study. Number two, ensuring there was no big difference between the two groups in terms of important variables. And these important variables we're referring to over here are age and education of the participants. How was order effect controlled? Order effect was controlled by including no MBSR control group. This helped determine how much of the change in gray matter concentration at the second scan was natural and how much was because of the MBSR program. Now, moving on towards the time that was spent on mindfulness. The average time spent on mindfulness exercise was 27 minutes per day, with 22.6 hours over 8 weeks program with a standard deviation of 6.3 hours. The time in minutes spent on MBSR exercises over 8 weeks was for mindfulness exercises such as body scan. This was 699 minutes. For yoga, it was 327 minutes. For sitting meditation, this was 332 minutes. Moving on towards the results. Now we divide the results into two groups over here. The results initially for the MBSR group, and then we talk about the results for the control group. Remember, we're talking about a comparison over here. We're talking about the extent to which MBSR would help participants become better, would help participants in their well-being. Now, there was a significant improvement in three aspects of mindfulness, that is, acting with awareness, observing, and non judging. Remember, we need to learn this. Number two, there was a noticeable increase in matter concentration, a noticeable increase in gray matter concentration in the following brain areas. To learn them, we have left hippocampus, number two, posterior cingulate cortex, number three, temporoparietal junction, number four, cerebellum. Pause this here and learn this right away. Moving on, there was no strong connection between GMC, that is gray matter concentration, and time spent in mindfulness exercises or the five aspects of mindfulness. Moving on towards the results for the control group over here, the control group did not show any meaningful improvement in any of the five aspects of mindfulness. Number two, they experienced a noticeable decrease in gray matter concentration in the posterior cingulate cortex. Let's conclude this real quick. Now, number one, regular mindfulness practice can cause specific change in the concentration of gray matter in certain areas of the brain, such as the left hippocampus and posterior cingulate cortex. Number two, these changes might be the reason why mindfulness has positive effects on well being, as these brain areas are known to be involved in learning, memory, controlling emotions, and understanding different perspectives. Number three, however, the effects of mindfulness on the insula were not clear in this study. It might take longer than 8 weeks to see changes in this area. Let's quickly discuss the ethics or the ethical issues over here. Participants in the experimental group agreed to participate fully by attending all meetings, completing assigned exercises, and recording their practice time in daily diaries. Number two, all participants were given a reduced fee as a token of appreciation because they participated in this research. Number three, participants who were claustrophobic or had metal implants were not included to avoid any psychological or physical harm from the MRI scanner. Thank you very much. I hope this helped.